Welcome to the community engagement session. I'm Elena Austin with the University of Washington. And our first speaker is Darlene Yaplee, co-founder of the Aviation-Impacted Communities Alliance, a national organization that works to protect communities from adverse aviation impacts. 77 community groups make up the alliance from across the country who are impacted by commercial and general aviation. Darlene will present a preview of the FAA Community Engagement Scorecard project that originated from her presentation on community engagement or disengagement at last year's A&E Symposium and was featured by the Airport Noise Report in an article, Scorecard Needed to Measure Progress by FAA on Community Engagement Goals. So, join me in welcoming Darlene to the podium.
Thank you, Elena, for the introduction. It's a real honor for me to be here today. The FAA has made efforts to improve community engagement to address the community concerns. This includes a community involvement manual, desk guide, and onboarding the Chief Engagement Officer, CEO, who acts as the primary point of contact between local communities and the FAA. As promoted by the FAA, and it's going to be covered in the scorecard questions, there's the noise portal for individuals to interact with the FAA for complaints or inquiries, and there's the roundtables. FAA has embraced roundtables as the appropriate place to engage with stakeholders, including community members about aviation noise concerns. Not on the visual is the chat bot, which is also mentioned quite a bit, an online tool to answer user questions via chat. The FAA Community Engagement Scorecard project was designed to solicit and summarize feedback from communities on their experience with FAA community engagement. Has there been improvement? Today, I'll cover a preview and highlights of the responses, followed by survey response themes and suggested recommendations. A future report is forthcoming. Outreach was to 77 groups that make up the AICA Alliance with a 61% response rate. The FAA asserts that the FAA has recognized that outreach and engagement on earlier projects has not been sufficient, and we have adjusted how we engage. Steady progress since 2016. Therefore, our evaluation period is from 2020 to 2022. This means it does not include the deficient community engagement for most of the next gen rollouts. The ICAO did surveys on community engagement also in 2017 and had 48 responses, and they did one in 2019 and had 33 responses. The FAA did a survey to the ATO on community involvement in 2020, but the number of responses were not disclosed. The scorecard project asked 29 total questions, which included local topics like a new or changed procedure and noise complaints that may have been made. The national topics include FAA advisory committees and FAA noise policy review process. As you can see in the chart, 43% of those that responded have been involved in some type of local and national engagement. 34% engaged locally. The responses were from 13 states, most of them from California at the highest, and followed by tie for second is Colorado, Massachusetts, and Washington State. Interesting enough, 47% of the 47 responders were impacted by more than one airport. So now we're going to move to some example questions that were made. There are two fundamental questions that were done in the survey, and these are the two questions. How much did FAA community engagement improve over the last 3 years? 28% for local said improvement. 59% said no improvement. National topics, 10% improvement, 70% not. For the communities reporting local improvement, they commented the FAA is approved a residential sound program, attended their noise forum for the first time, and provided more community-facing presentations. The communities with no improvement reported the continued lack of FAA responsiveness and engagement. Communities that reported worse FAA engagement stated that programs, roles, and statements that are deemed as improvements in community engagement were not and misleading. Additionally, the communities had little to no communication, collaboration, or progress over multiple years. Now let's look at a few more additional questions. Is there a roundtable affiliated with your primary airport? 64% said there is a roundtable affiliated with the airport. 35% says there's no roundtable. 4 reported that there is a roundtable, but we are not allowed to join. So we didn't ask the question, is it a roundtable and are you allowed to participate? We just asked if there was a roundtable. If the question was rephrased, only 55% of the communities would have had a roundtable that they could participate in, and 41% would have been no. Who is representing your group at the roundtable? 40% actually have a resident as one of the representatives. The saying, if you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. Well, the same applies here. If you've seen one roundtable, you've seen one roundtable. Roundtable membership varies substantially. For example, some have residents as members and some don't. Some have 250K budgets and some have no money. Some have consultants and some have no consultants. Having a resident on the roundtable is not indicative of itself. It really depends on who the other members are. One community member reported consultants hired by roundtables work for firms where the majority of their funding comes from airports or FAA. If the roundtables seek proactive efforts to address noise impacts and interpretations and critique proposals from the FAA or the airport and policies, procedures, methodologies, and reports from an impacted community perspective, then the consultants seem to have a conflict of interest. Has the CEO ombudsman improved community engagement? Local topics, 90% no. National topics, 86% no. The community reporting yes on the local topics stated the FAA has started attending the noise roundtable meetings. However, so far it's been virtual and he's agreed to attend the next meeting in person. National programs, 81% said the noise portal has not improved. The chatbot, 50% has not improved. What has improved was the NES webinar that happened in 2021 in January, and 52% said that was not improved. The Federal Register notices has some improvement. Does the FAA include adequate community representation? These are the advisory committees that the FAA has, as well as the noise policy review process. Notice that this survey was done before the announcement that happened on Monday. Is there adequate community representation? There were no adequate answers. All the answers were not adequate, not familiar, or blank. The most familiarity was with the NAC, which makes sense, and the next was with the noise policy process. But keep in mind, it has been 1.5 years since we did get the NES update, since there's been any update at all on the noise policy review process, which is probably why it scored as low as it did. The survey response themes and recommendations is what I'm going to cover next, and there's 7 in total. The first insight is the imbalance between safety and efficiency and environmental impacts. Jesse Chancellor also mentioned the imbalance in his presentation. The FAA mission includes addressing environmental impacts, not the promotion of aviation. Our recommendation is to elevate the importance of environmental impacts to be co-equal to efficiency and restructure accordingly the FAA. Insight number 2. Can leverage a lot of what was shared with Dr. Christensen for this, which is that community engagement is constrained by the current interpretation of significant impact at DNL 65. Because it determines the level and outcome of environmental reviews and whether there even needs to be any community engagement. Our recommendation is update these interpretations, processes, and policies. For example, the next gen concentration, as well as the findings from the NES. The FAA interpretation and processes should reflect the true impacts and concerns of people on the ground and comply with ASNA, which is what Dr. Christensen covered in her previous presentation. Jesse Chancellor also covered the N above as a better metric for next gen noise exposure. So this one has a lot of opportunity with the request for comment that came out yesterday. One example of communities not co-equal is the noise policy review process up to date? FAA Administrator Dixon's letter to the Quiet Skies Caucus, May 2021, set expectations that there would be an inclusive and participatory process that prioritizes input from substantially affected stakeholders, including local communities. We can provide provide updated briefings as a review gets underway. A year ago, in March 2022, the FAA presented to a REDAC subcommittee a summary of the 44,000 comments from the noise research that was done. They also had an agenda item, which was input, requests, and discussion on next steps. The subcommittee members are made of researchers, all external, airports, and airlines. The FAA presenter was also the same presenter to the community meeting last year at the A&E conference. And we did not receive any update on the NES study, and we were not asked for any issues, discussion, et cetera. And this is an example of why the community feels like we are not co-equal. We're not getting information, and this was available again in September 2022. And a month later, we had our community meeting with the same speaker. The next insight is the FAA recognizes that next-gen increased concentration and the number of flights over certain communities, but disowns the responsibility for the mitigation. The community is expected to propose mitigations. Our recommendation is for the FAA to propose and implement mitigation actions and strategies. The FAA, not the citizens, are uniquely qualified to do this. And Marie-Jo covered that using NOM systems, airports can also help ideas for mitigation. Number 5, our recommendation is to provide sufficient dialogue and collaboration, whether it's a procedure or input to a program to address community concerns. For example, the FAA programs such as the Ombudsman, the Noise Portal, or the Noise Policy Review could and should have notable improvements in community engagement. And by getting early feedback, we can help work with the FAA to in fact accomplish that. Insight number 6, not all harm communities are included in roundtables to engage with the FAA. The survey responses indicate the ombudsman are not improving community engagement. Our recommendation is to fill the ombudsman mandate, which was part of the Reauthorization Act of 2018, and truly serve as a regional liaison with the public, including community groups. This would address non-roundtable communities. Second, they were supposed to make recommendations to the administrator to address concerns raised by the public. And lastly, be consulted on proposed changes to aircraft operations. Delivering on the ombudsman mandate would go a long way for improving community engagement with roundtables or not. Insight number 7, building trust through demonstrated results. The FAA has asserted the improvement of engagement, such as the noise portal, the ombudsman, and the other items that I shared today. Per the survey responses, these efforts have not improved community engagement. Additionally, from the Reauthorization Act of 2018, the metrics report to Congress, which was section 173 and 188, the Quiet Skies Caucus asserted the FAA's report is unacceptable. The FAA failed to meet its mandate because it didn't evaluate alternative noise metrics, standing by standards that don't fully capture noise impacts. The FAA must go back to the drawing board and write a new report. Section 176 mandated a review of FAA's community involvement practices, including how to improve and lessons learned. The report was based on a survey solely to ATO. To reduce misalignment and mistrust, the community can support the FAA by providing early feedback so programs will improve engagement. The FAA can also support independent assessments, such as from the GAO, to improve and bolster community engagement overall. I hope that Monday's request for comment and the future seminars that the FAA does on noise policy review will not be a check the box activity, will in fact fulfill the FAA's assertion and prioritize input from the substantially affected communities. My final thoughts is there has been some improvement, more on the local versus the national, which I've shared with you. And some communities had some specific things that they benefited from. And the neighborhood environmental survey webinar was positive. And there were notable collaborations that were based on very large state or county regional groups that teamed with the FAA on projects. So that seemed to be a best practice, but not available to all communities. There was least improvement on the items that I list here. So today I shared a preview. You're the first ever to see, and the highlights of the FAA Community Engagement Scorecard. People that are affected by noise were the ones that replied to the survey. So we need the FAA to engage with communities as co-equal stakeholders and to protect people on the ground and to have an aviation system that works for all. Thank you for listening.
All right, so I'll invite you to share questions through the Slido app as before. And we have one question here, which is, if Darlene, you could recommend an engagement process that could be meaningful for a community group that is dissatisfied with the current process status quo.
I think that's almost all the communities. That's not unique. Well, I think the challenge is if you have a roundtable that is a venue for you to work with your roundtable, that doesn't mean it's going to solve every problem, but that is definitely an open venue. If you do not have a roundtable, it is a problem because the ombudsman and so on are not fulfilling the mandate to be the public liaison outreach to communities. So I think we are trying to do a lot of things to make that different. There's actually a bill proposed by Rep Lynch, I forget the number, but it's to set up a advisory committee of impacted communities so that they have a voice as an advisory committee to the FAA. There is community representatives on FAA advisory committees, but as you saw in the survey, there isn't a feeling by the community that that is adequate or that that's adequate representation.
All right, thanks. And we have another question here, which is, how did you select which community members were surveyed?
We have 77 organizations across the nation that are part of our alliance, and each group picked their person that they wanted to fill out the survey. So each group made their own selection that they felt would be a good representative for their group. We decided to go with groups, not 4,000 individual responses, because it's a qualitative and quantitative survey.
All right, thank you. And then we have, I guess, a personal opinion question, which is, how do you feel about the FAA community engagement on the noise policy review?
I have several different answers, I suppose. I'm disappointed that it's been a 1.5 years since we've heard anything. And it was disappointing to find that slide set that was done September 2022. Recently, I found it going on a website. And to know that that has never been shared with anyone. And it's just an update on a findings of the survey. In fact, one slide was given today by the FAA. So it's frustrating that some communication is better than no communication, and you wonder why you're not getting it, and you wonder why you didn't, what else you didn't get. So that's kind of the downside. I am sincerely hope that the effort that is coming forward by the FAA is a sincere community engagement, and there is dialogue, not you ask a question, it gets asked, and there's a party line answer, which doesn't completely answer your question, but you're not allowed to do a follow-up. And I'm very adamant about that because all of you in the audience, I know that some people feel that the community, what have you, but if you had 2 minutes to speak and no one answered your question, how would you feel? And think about every engagement you did with the FAA or the airport for that matter, or the airport to the FAA, whatever you want to say, if your only engagement is a 2-minute comment and then it's thank you. And that's the frustration because it often doesn't yield progress. So I'm hoping that that will be different this time. And I really am hoping that.
All right. And I think we have time for one last question, although there's a lot of fantastic questions in the chat. And the question is really practical. So how can a community surrounding a small regional airport get a roundtable in place for their community?
The long question. Well, one thing I discovered in this survey, which was a surprise, I wasn't kidding when I said, you've seen one roundtable, you've seen one roundtable. There are so many different answers related to that, for example, just because you have a roundtable doesn't mean that the FAA comes to your roundtable. So that may not be recognized even if you're a roundtable. There's a lot of roundtables that have no money. So I don't know, at some point, how useful is that? So I think that the question is, what is their capabilities and what is it they're trying to accomplish? And is there any state group and, and so on. So that's, I'd have to talk to them. So it varies quite a bit. And there could be a whole study on roundtables.
Well, thank you so much. It's a
Thank
really
you.
great presentation.
Welcome to the last session of the day before we do some exciting awards. My name is Alex Gertson. I'm Director of Airports at the National Business Aviation Association, NBAA, and I have the distinct privilege to introduce and moderate this final panel. First, we have Tina Orwal, Washington State Representative. She's representing the 33rd District, and she's been in the position since 2009. Thank you for your service. Following Tina, we have Dr. Elena Austin. She is at the University of Washington Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences, and she's doing research there. Debbie Wagner is the community representative. And then next to her is Wig Zaymore, collaborative work connecting grassroots science and public process. So please welcome the speakers to this last and insightful panel for the day.
Good afternoon. Good to see you. I was wondering when I came here, if I was worried I might need an acronym and data analysis interpreter, but I think I've been tracking a lot of your comments. You're a very brilliant group. How many of you have flown into SeaTac Airport? Ah, excellent. You have been in my district. I have the honor of representing SeaTac and the surrounding area, and it's a beautiful area. It's surrounded, you got Mount Rainier, you got the water. It's kind of a hub for manufacturing, mostly with Boeing. We have a lot of warehouses with Amazon. It's a culturally rich area. I have a school district where they speak over 140 languages. And we also have struggles with poverty and health disparities. So we have a lot going on in our district. And so the airport and having a discussion around the impacts of the airport is an important part of what I do. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes giving a big picture. I'm going to talk a little bit of what we call the trifecta for change and what we've done in Washington. 3 steps we've taken that I think has led to some system change, and a little bit about funding from the state. So next slide. So the trifecta for change, and the first horse would be government. And we've really done a good job partnering at every level of government. So obviously I'm from the state, but the cities, the county, SeaTac Airport is owned by the port. And so they're one of our partners, as well as the federal government. So that's the first part of the trifecta. The middle horse is our university. Here is with us is University of Washington, go Huskies, very proud graduate. So we have a university at the table. And the third and most important is the community voices. And so one of the shifts I've seen, and I've been serving a number of years, I raised my kids by the airport, is that we've really found ways of working together that we didn't historically have. And when I started in the legislature, there was a very large fight over a third runway. That was just concluded. And so I came in after what was probably a very political time. And so these new partnerships have helped us move forward. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So one of the things at the state level that I think shifted, because when we first started talking about airports, people would say, well, you knew there was going to be noise, you chose to live there, and there wasn't much discussion about the impacts. And so one of the shifts that we really had is talking about health impacts, whether it's noise related or pollution or ultrafine particles. So I've found that shift has really been helped my colleagues be much more responsive. Also, a lot of people from the community sharing their stories. In Olympia, I've always found you can have the perfect bill, but if you don't have the stories and why it's important, the bills don't move. And so really, it's been a great partnership on that. I also think having local data is really important. And one of the things I had 2 constituents that reached out, they're worried about kids with asthma and about the airport. And that's when I learned that University of Washington had already been doing work in this area. They had looked at the footprint of LAX and Atlanta, and it was a great opportunity for us to have them look at the footprint of SeaTac Airport. So they were a very logical partner up front. And that's kind of how we started this kind of trifecta. The other thing is, and when I say, trifecta for change, it's really about mitigation. It's about reducing the impacts and really seeing change. And so the next part, when I talk about the state level, it's always been, we don't want to just study things. We want to actually begin mitigation and make changes. Next slide. So we've done a number of things. One of the first pieces we did was actually was with the University of Washington called the Move Up Study, and you're going to hear about that today. And that was kind of our first step in, was again for them to do that footprint of what was going on around SeaTac and the ultrafine particles. We also did probably a more traditional study that you'll see there in 2018. I say traditional because it was one of those studies that didn't have a lot of feet, but what it did was it elevated the work around the ultrafine particles. So I actually think that was the benefit. And then we did called the CACC, which was to try to cite another airport. I don't know if you've tried that. It's really difficult. We had this group come back with recommendations this session. And that group was dismantled. We have a new group starting. So it's very difficult. And I think part of it, and a group of us were in DC last week and talking to our congressional staff, and one of the cities said, well, we got to treat our airport communities really well so that someone else will take a new airport, right? Because we're at capacity. And if all they hear is the horror stories and they don't hear about the partnerships, it makes it very difficult. So again, I think we're going to continue to work on that. We are at capacity in 10 years. Some of us think we're at capacity now. It's, if you've been in SeaTac, it's surrounded by residential, right? And, they had, I think, close to 50 million passengers in 2020. So that's a lot of passengers. And so again, we're kind of locked in and certainly feel that. One of the other things we've done is had the State Department of Health and our King County Department of Health, who's here today, and I think you've heard or will hear from them in another session, really look at health impacts and look at the health disparities around airport communities compared to other parts of our county. And again, that's to kind of raise those issues about what we're seeing. You'll hear more about that. We also did a bill to allow for failed port packages. I don't know if your communities have faced that, but we have a lot of our packages of people near the airport where the windows and insulation and other changes. And again, our port's been a great partner on that. So we also, you're going to hear about healthy schools. And it almost is like we started looking at air quality outside air quality, and then we've moved to looking at indoor air quality. And so you're going to hear about our findings. We were very inspired by Boston, who's done a lot of work in this area. So again, we've seen a lot of systemic change, and I know Elena will tell you more. So this session, what we've done is we took some of our climate and impacted community dollars. There's a lot of new dollars right now. And we actually are funding an asthma study, which is going to, it's going to target families around the airport that have children with asthma, but it's also going to look at indoor air quality before and after the use of HEPA filters and health conditions. And then the last one is our entity that got an EPA grant to do monitoring around the airport. We asked if they could also monitor ultrafine particles, and they didn't have the equipment. So our state actually got the funding so that they can also monitor the ultrafine particles. So those are some of the state investments we've done. But I just want to say, I just want to thank the members of the panel that are just doing extraordinary work. And again, I think we're starting to see some traction, but I certainly am learning a lot and have hope being here today. So thank you.
Great, so thank you. And I'll be presenting on behalf of a larger research team today at the University of Washington. One of the exciting things about the work that we've been doing in the context of this partnership is it's really allowed our research from the beginning to be directed by the questions and the needs expressed to us by both the government partners and research partners. And I have some pictures here, some examples of some of the activities that we've led in communities around the airport. And that includes some walkarounds, some where we look at noise and ultrafine particles. We've also had some advisory boards, and we have Debbie Wagner here, who's one of our advisory board members, as well as Tina Orwal and many others. And it's also allowed us to engage with other communities and other groups across the US who have interest in local issues. And we have Wig Zamor, who will be presenting on behalf of some of the groups in Boston. And so just some background, we haven't yet talked too much about ultrafine particles in this meeting, although you'll hear more about them tomorrow. And so, of course, ultrafine particles are currently unregulated at the community level, but they have potentially important roles in determining health outcomes. And although there's no causal association right now established between ultrafine particles and health outcomes, there's suggestion that there may be causal effects. However, the health effects of ultrafine particles, they are more uncertain as compared to PM 2.5, which is a size of particle that is larger, it's 2.5 microns. It is regulated at the federal level by the US EPA and has causal effects, including cardiovascular disease and others. There are important sources, many important sources of ultrafine particle, and those include diesel combustion. And so we have both truck traffic that contributes to ultrafine particles, as well as other sources of diesel combustion, such as aircraft. And we also have wood smoke and photochemical processes that will contribute. And one of the tricky things about ultrafine particles is they're extremely variable spatially. And in time. And so establishing long-term exposure trends to ultrafines is quite challenging. One of the really exciting things for me about being involved in this research is because we were asked by the legislature to do this research and explicitly engage with community as it was being done. I received, and my group received, a lot of support at the university level to really conduct a very thorough engagement process. And I think that part is key. So for those of you who fund research projects out there, putting in those RFAs that there are requirements for engagement really does make a difference for how we receive support at the university level for doing that engagement. So just throwing that out there. Some of the ways that we tried to capture engagement was through the creation of our advisory group. That group includes representation from different levels of government, federal, state, local. The Port of Seattle is represented. We have community representatives as well as researchers. And that group has really been a great venue for sharing ideas, asking questions, and research goals. We've also made an effort to have ongoing communications with community, and we've done that through presentations, walkarounds, gatherings, presentations like this. And we also put out project communications that go beyond traditional scientific return of results. And so we include media and policy briefs in our returns of results. I'll direct you, these slides I think will be available to our project website to learn more about our Move Up study. In very brief terms, that study found that UFPs in our Seattle area are emitted by both traffic and aircraft sources, and that in fact the total concentration of UFP did not allow us to distinguish between roadway and aircraft features. But we did find that we could distinguish the spatial impact of traffic and aircraft by looking at the size distribution of the particles that we were measuring and finding smaller diameters for the aircraft related ultrafines. And again, you can go find details. We also have a link here to the scientific publication that came from that research. Another really exciting process through this engagement and advisory group was we were able to identify knowledge gaps from that initial study. And there were 3 main knowledge gaps that our advisory identified. And the first was, how do concentrations of UFP compare across communities within our area and potentially even nationally? How can we reduce human exposures to UFP? So if we know that UFP are out there, there are multiple sources, there may be health effects, what can we do now? And then lastly, what are the health effects of aircraft, particularly aircraft-related UFP, both in the long term and the short term? So I'm running out of time, but I'll very quickly talk to you about some of these ongoing activities. And I think Tina mentioned some of them. The first is a portable HEPA filter intervention project, the Healthy Schools, Healthy Air project. This was funded by the state of Washington and local partners. We're currently in 16 schools. We have 5 classrooms per school where we're implementing our study protocols. And we're looking at both the impact of HEPA filters indoors on the air quality, as well as the use of those HEPA filters. We also have a pending asthma and airport air quality intervention project to promote asthma education, as well as air quality intervention in asthmatic children. And then we have 2 associated projects, one from Seattle and King County Public Health, and one from a partner research group at the University of Washington that will be presenting tomorrow in the health and aviation impacted communities. And so I invite you to learn more about these projects to attend that session. For the Healthy Schools, Healthy Air project, that project is still ongoing, so we only have so far preliminary results. But as I mentioned, we have 16 participating schools at various distances from traffic and flight paths. And we're collecting real-time indoor and outdoor data. And our pilot project from this study, which is currently published in the literature, shows some pretty significant benefits to implementing HEPA filters in those pilot classrooms that we worked with. It also shows some infiltration, some significant infiltration of ultrafine particles from outdoor into indoor spaces. Okay, I have 0 time left. I want to make one last plug though, before I give it over to Debbie, which is really, we also need to be focusing on long-term averages and long-term trends in ultrafine particle and other traffic-related air pollutants, both from roadways and aircrafts. And it's really essential to be engaging with state and local agencies to develop plans for long-term monitoring across the U.S. to better understand how these may be impacting health. And then as a reminder, in our area, because of engagement with the University of Washington, we were monitoring for PM 2.5 3 decades before the national ambient air quality standards were implemented in 1997. And so if we don't have that long-term trend, we won't be able to make associations with long-term health outcomes. And this is our research team. We have really an interdisciplinary team of people in environmental health, public health, biostatistics, and engineering, and they've all been key members of our team. And I'll pass it over to Debbie, who has been one of our community partners in this work.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. While we're transitioning, I wanted to remind us, I know we're well trained, but just a reminder, it's late in the day, to please submit your questions. I don't see anything in Slido yet, so please go ahead, submit your questions so that we're ready to respond to them once the presentations conclude. Thank you. Please go ahead.
So hi, I'm Debbie Wagner, and I'm a community representative. I'm only one of many people that have been a part of working with the team here, and just great people. And the one thing that I think is so important to this is the collaboration element. We've heard a lot about today, trying to get FAA to collaborate with us. Just talk to us. We're real people. We have real good ideas sometimes. And so that is the part that has made the difference, to have your voice elevated to the point of where you're listened to, you're believed, and respond. You know, that is an amazing thing. And that's something we've done with our trifecta that hasn't happened in all the avenues of pursuing, you know, answers from FAA and maybe Congress and people at various levels in the past on our issues. So I click it. So my primary question has always been, is it safe to live where I live? And what are the boundaries of the safe area? And how is it unsafe or safe, and when? So those questions that I have, I brought to Move Up Advisory. So my relationship to that was asking a lot of questions. We've learned something now. What do we need to know next? And how can that work out to positive solutions in my life? You know, a simple thing, something that Boston did was real-time air quality analysis to find out, should I take my child to this park to play today? Or should I go jog down this particular path? Those are important questions for those of us who are having the lived experience in the environment. So I think the problem, some of the difficulty we have is that it's easy to ignore the public, and especially noise complaints. They hear a lot of those every day, and it probably gets kind of old. You go to a representative and they've got 1,000 things going on with many people talking to them. It's kind of easy to dismiss it or put it off. You go to the FAA and they don't answer. So our process began simply with the representative visiting the community and asking some questions. And the reason why I thought it's important to present this here is because anybody can do this. You just invite your policymakers to your community, talk to them about what your problems are, and have a discussion about what are some solutions, or what do I need to know more about. You know, I've been waiting for 30 years for FAA to answer one of my letters. But I can call Tina on the phone and say, hey, you know, what do you think about this thing or that? Or I can text Elena and say, wouldn't this be a great idea? You know, and they can say yes or no, but they'll talk to me. And that's the point. That is the nexus of where we need to be. And it would be nice if we could be there with the industry, but that is much more difficult. So Tina Orwal spent a lot of time in our community listening to what we had to say about failed noise mitigation, concerns about health and emissions, concerns about noise and sleep loss. She initiated the process to engage this group together with the UW to start researching and getting answers to our questions. We're all only here today because the legislation had community engagement written into it, so the process can continue. They can come out and talk about this to any community group whenever they want to. So a lot of times, you know, you might think about this like seeing the doctor, where you don't actually visit the doctor and they prescribe something for you. A lot of times it's that way. You never get any checkup to see if it's working. It's that way with noise mitigation, and a lot of times policymakers, they slap a fix on it and walk away and think that everything's going to be fine. And we've not been fine. So I wanted to point out, this is just one quick example of one of the things that happened that created a question. It was a modeled plume of where the ultrafine particles are. And the obvious question for me after seeing this was, I wonder what the health of the people is like inside that plume. And so that was a gap question that, you know, ended up being next analysis and next study that was funded and researched and reported on. So these are important questions, important partnerships, and we're getting important answers and making real progress in areas that help us. As a citizen, when I walk into somewhere now, I'm not just a complainer, I can be a campaigner. I'm coming in with science. I'm not just a whining complainer that's easy to dismiss. I'm somebody walking in with data and facts and, science proof of the impact. And I can say something needs to be done about this and help work with the partnership to create solutions. That's my spiel. I hope you liked it. Thank you for listening.
Great, very important points.
Good afternoon. Wig Zamor. I'm a Z. I'm used to going last. I realize there's beer and wine in the hall, but I hope you'll allow a little bit of patience. Doing something unusual, Debbie and I were given an hour each to talk to US EPA in advance of the non-volatile ultrafine particle standard for aviation, which has since been enacted. It is the first ultrafine particle regulation to my knowledge. And I am going to literally run the presentation that I gave to EPA with some audience from my co-researchers and community members. And it will be on the record for anybody who wants to look at it. We won't have time to dwell on many of the slides, so I hope you'll forgive me for that. So this is just an agenda for a community meeting looking at Logan Airport Health Study, noise impacts, air pollution impacts from aviation, and health endpoints, which we put on about 5 years ago. That's enough for that. This is a kind of pretty good framework outline. So I think of the Clean Air Act as 1970. They split industry and transportation because transportation was much harder and took a couple extra years. You guys probably know about Mooney's three-way catalytic converter. That was a solution to a really hard problem. Massachusetts was the last wholly non-compliant state when we were starting to do some of this grassroots research and kind of activation. Then along came Harvard six-city studies. I'm going to touch on that a little bit more, in American Cancer Society. Those two studies tied PM 2.5 to 50% of all mortality in the US. So really, really important. And then I'm going to get to where we are now. So I told you I'm going to have a wide range here. I'm not going to dwell on this, but it's pretty important to understand different scales of time and space and what things are important at those scales of time and space. And again, this is a kind of a different way of showing the same thing, but the basic message here is that the most common elements in our world are the same things we're made of. So there are lots of opportunities for unfortunate interaction. Here's another log scale for both time and space. And I'm not going to dwell on it, but you can kind of see the general approach here. These are pictures from Somerville. We have the most traffic in the state per square mile, the most people per square mile, the most diesel rail per square mile. And those are regional facilities. They have nothing to do with how people get around in this community. So there's a lot of exposures. And we've been working on more sustainable solutions to both walking and biking and transit. This is the Harvard Six Cities study. It was brilliant in how wide it was framed because they did not know the outcomes. They expected pulmonary outcomes. What they found was blockbuster cardiovascular mortality with a very large and very rational concentration response function. If you look at the lower right on this slide, that's the concentration response function, and they're right in order of the exposures. And these are really large differences in mortality. Same thing was done with lung cancer a couple of years later by some members of the same team. Arden Pope led this, great environmental economist from Utah, and pretty much the same outcome. So there in those two studies, 50% of all mortality and unexpected outcomes when they were thinking pulmonary. This is a pretty important slide. So quite a while ago, some places started to do whole population studies of near source exposures. You know, people who lived within 50 meters, 100 meters of highways, compared to background in the very same cities. And again, they thought they were gonna find sulfur oxides rather than nitrogen oxides. They thought they were going to find industry, but it turned out to be traffic. So I'm just going to mention these really quickly. But the first was I have here is Nyberg from Stockholm. And what they found was 60% higher cardiovascular mortality for the top 5% exposed. Nyberg is also the top epidemiologist at AstraZeneca, one of the top pharma companies in the world. The same thing happened in California with childhood asthma, really great work by the scientists in Los Angeles. And then in Vancouver, they found the same relationship with people living right next to highways compared to further away. That's 55% higher mortality. These are 10 times the scale of regional differences in fine particulate matter outcomes, and they have not been addressed. Just a picture of Aerodyne, an early partner, best air pollution research group in the world. They happen to be local to us. An NO2 study that was really well done in our community. This is the Aerodyne study. You can see the UFP particle number count compared to other things. Same thing. This is by Gail Hagler, the best EPA study, the same thing. There is no correlation between PM 2.5 and ultrafine particles, none at this scale. And then Carner from UC Davis. This is the most cited multi-pollutant study comparing near roadway ultrafines and all of these other pollutants under consideration. So this is starting to be our study, our first study. We've done this in 6 cities in Somerville. We looked at ultrafine particles and cardiovascular because that's the biggest outcome. And again, Allison Patton, who's a senior staff scientist at Health Effects Institutes now, the most important air pollution accountability group in the world. She did the first analysis of the exposures, which is much more difficult than the health side. And again, no correlation with PM 2.5. And here you can see the outcomes. And on the top right, this is high sensitivity C-reactive protein, one of the best markers for inflammation in the cardiovascular system. You can see how straight that reaction is. Yeah, I'm skipping 5 slides now. She's going to talk tomorrow. She's done some great work with us on aviation in particular, and you're going to see that tomorrow. There we go. So this is a noise map from Logan, which you've seen before, and it's from 2015. Those are shrinking as the population sensitivity is going up. And this is a slide I put on top of a study by Sandy Fidel, who advanced the work of Schultz by looking at community tolerance levels. And what I want to show you here is the vertical lines. So you've got the FAA 65D and L. On the right side, you've got Winthrop right next to Logan exposures. And then the blue line is traffic exposures to noise in Somerville. And then the 50 is pretty much the target following NES. So the traffic exposures in Somerville, which is very close to Logan, are 2 orders of magnitude greater in noise level than the aviation exposures. These things have to be studied together. They are cumulative in their impacts on people. And I just, this is one slide I included from World Health Europe. People have focused almost entirely on noise annoyance, which is by far the least serious health impact from a health outcomes point of view. The cardiovascular ischemic heart disease is 20 times as great. The effects on sleep are greater. The effects from learning disabilities are also greater. All the talk is about annoyance because it's acutely felt, but these are much more serious health effects as an epidemiologist would look at it. Noise, Volpe, noise model, national, both aviation and roads. It doesn't have rail yet. On the left, you see the regional airports in Boston. On the right, you see, if you look carefully, the blue lines where the highways are showing just how much higher those noise exposures are if people live next to them or if there are schools next to them. This is another picture of this is the corridor that has most of the environmental justice population in Somerville, both the large federal and state projects and the triple deckers. I'll go back for a sec, but you can see it's got a lot of traffic. Okay, last thing I wanted to touch on, and this is where we might go to causal impact. I don't have any doubt myself that a compound called NLRP3 inflammasome. So inflammasome biology is the biology of IL-1 family cytokines. So these are really base level inflammatory molecules or complexes that light a fire on the rest of inflammation. There are 20 human inflammasomes. This one integrates all inflammation, whether it's from chronic disease, whether it's from particulate matter, whether it's from heart disease, lung cancer, chronic kidney disease, neurological disease. NLRP3 integrates all of them. This science has developed over 20 years. It has very little penetration into the environmental epidemiology world because they do not have advanced cell biology laboratories to correlate with those exposures. This is the first paper that really started to detail the structures, came out of Hao Wu lab at one of the Harvard Medical School cell labs. And Gabriel Nunes from University of Michigan is a giant because he realized that ions going in and out of the cells after the particles had gone in were triggering the immune reactions. And this is just a picture of yeah, I'm out of time. This is the last one. I'm sorry. I knew I would be out of time. But there's a lot of this literature. If you have access to National Library of Medicine, it's easy to look up. These show particles coming in. They show the process within the cell, and then they show the inflammatory molecules going out. They communicate with each other. Once one is triggered, all the rest of them are triggered by receptors that another one has found an enemy. And I better stop there, I think. And this shows you all of the diseases related to both NLRP3 and particles. And I just wanted to say, this is last 10 seconds. We need to press these things together. You know, we know about particles and noise. There's NLRP3 inflammasome to investigate and EJ populations. If we don't tie them together, we won't have a causal pathway that will demand defense. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take just a few questions before we transition to the award ceremony. For Dr. Austin, on ultrafine particle tracking and studies at CTAC, who is managing that effort? Community members, university researchers, or government?
I mean, I think it really is a true partnership. And so the funding has come from government as well as input on specific research questions that were mandated to answer with that funding. But then we form an advisory group, again, from the onset of the research to establish that the hypothesis that we're trying to address, as well as the methods, are truly answering the questions. And that's where we get input, again, from our government partners, our community partners, and our research partners.
Great. And then a follow-up question, how much does rain reduce particle impacts?
Okay, so Nilakshi Huda, who says 6%, so I'll go with that.
Question about a local roundtable funding. If they could get funding for health studies, would Washington share study design and recommend additions to the next set of studies? And what would the cost of these studies be? Any idea?
So, no, I have no idea, because the cost of the study would obviously have to do with the scope and the location of the study. We are always happy to partner with other research groups and other communities and share information.
Okay, great. And then final question for Debbie. What was the health of those in the plume? You didn't clarify that, I think, in the.
So I'll just give a teaser. So tomorrow is going to be a presentation on that at 11 o'clock. It's part of our health panel and it's dramatic. You will not be disappointed. You might be scared, but you will not be disappointed.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Please help me thank our panelists. And then we're going to transition to the Walt Gillfillan Award presentation. I'd like to invite Dave Carboni to come up, please. Dave is a retired airport and land use compatibility planner and former coordinator and program manager for the San Francisco International Airport Community Roundtable. He has been involved with this event for many, many years and has really put his heart and soul into the process for this award and the committee, the presentations that are associated with it. So I'd really like to recognize Dave for all his time and efforts as he comes up so that we can present the award and the nominees.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for those comments. And I must say I was quite impressed with the last session. Now I feel like I have to make an appointment with my primary care physician to get a chest x-ray, but thank you for that. Again, I'm going to make a note of that so I could get a checkup. So that was a lot to take in, and thanks everybody for that information. Just for a moment, everybody either stand up, take a deep breath. I know it's 5 o'clock, but how about just a little stand up, take a deep breath, relax for a minute. We got a lot of information today. A lot of great speakers, but let's just take a real quick break and have a moment to ourselves. Let's stand up for a minute. Take a deep breath. Wave your arms. Hey, Sandra, wave your arms. Stretch, okay. Make an appointment to see your primary care physician if you possibly can, okay? All right, so this is. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the 2023 Aviation Noise Symposium Walt Gillfillan Awards ceremony. As Alex mentioned, I'm Dave Carboni and Alex and I are going to co-host this ceremony this afternoon. Just a raise of hands. How many folks either met or know? How many of you know the name Walt Gillfillan? Everybody raise your hand. How many of you met him? Know who he was? Okay, okay. Well, before we get to the actual award presentation, Alex and I would like to share with you some information about Walt and also a brief overview of the Walt Gillfillan Award selection process. There's a picture of Mr. Gillfillan. A little brief background about Walt, just so you know who he was. Walt was a San Francisco Bay Area based transportation planning consultant for over 40 years with a practice on airport issues. He was a national leader facilitating community dialogue with airports and other relevant stakeholders regarding community noise impacts from airport and aircraft operations and general aviation and commercial service airports. Walt was instrumental in the creation of the airport community roundtables at SFO and LAX. The roundtable model that he created has since been implemented at several other airports across the country. Walt founded this symposium in 1985. It started at UC Berkeley and was later moved to the UC Davis Air Quality Research Center where we are today. Walt used the term symposium to emphasize the interactive nature of the event, at which all stakeholders can openly discuss aircraft noise and emissions issues and share best practices from across the US and around the world. Walt was known for his enthusiasm for eliciting audience questions and answers during the symposium sessions. He would roam around the room, and if you had a question, he shoved the microphone in your face. He is also remembered, many of you may remember, for his hosting his lively soirees in his hotel suite during the symposium evenings. If you didn't go to one of those, you missed a lot of fun. So he was quite the bartender. So, well, just. Now a little brief background about the award itself. Here's a picture of the award. This award is presented annually at this event to honor Walt as a founder of the symposium. The purpose of the award is to highlight an individual or individuals or an organization whose exemplary achievements and or contributions in aviation noise mitigation and or emissions reduction deserve recognition by his, her, or their peers. This is a unique award in that there is no other similar recognition at any other academic institution or aviation environmental forum. As shown on the slide, the first award was presented actually to Walt Gillfillan in 2006. Since then, there have been a total of 23 award recipients up until 2022. The achievements and contributions of these Walt Gillfillan Award recipients in aviation noise mitigation and or emissions reduction highlight the pursuit of our collective efforts to address these important quality of life issues here in the United States and around the world. Please join me to recognize these past award recipients. Next up, Alex will go.
All right. Go to the next slide. You're probably wondering, what is the eligibility to be nominated for this award? And essentially, any person or organization contributing to pursue the airport or aircraft noise mitigation and or aviation emissions reduction is eligible to be nominated and receive the Walt Gillfillan Award. Anyone can nominate a person or persons or an organization for the award, including a self-nomination. So keep that in mind for future years. Each nomination must describe how the efforts and activities of the nominees met one or more of the following award criteria as shown on the slide. You can see a number of these, such as making a valuable contribution to aircraft noise and emissions, being a leader, innovator, or key strategist who improved our understanding of the science underpinning the field, advances in technology, crafting better policy, drafting balanced regulations, working to improve communications among stakeholders, providing clear and understandable legal interpretations, and inspiring others to do any or all of the above. We have a number of nominees that were put forward this year. Very fortunate to have quite a diverse mix. The nominations were submitted, were reviewed by a volunteer committee of stakeholders, and some of whom are, I'm sorry, I think I skipped this page. Or did it skip a slide? Okay. So the submitted nominations are reviewed by a volunteer committee of stakeholders, some of whom are previous Gillfillan Award recipients. And based on their review of the nomination information and how that information relates to the award criteria, the committee members by consensus select a nominee that best fits the criteria. So the nominations are shown here, and let's jump to the next slide to see the committee. So we have Dave, myself, and Sandra and Vince, and those who were nominated this year were Danielle McGregor, Jason Schwartz, Cindy Christensen, Darlene Yaplee, Cindy Chavez, Steve Albertson, James Allardyce, and John Paul Clark. So who do you think won the award? Dave.
Now, the moment we've all been waiting for is time to present the 2023 Walt Gillfillan Award. This year, we have two well-deserving award recipients as determined by the Review and Selection Committee. I'd now like to ask Greg Maxwell to come up and offer a few comments about his nominee.
The nominee retired from the Boeing Company in 2017 as the company's airport and community noise engineering group leader after a long and distinguished 32-year career devoted to finding innovative solutions to reduce aviation noise. He is a pioneer in the field with a legacy that touches airports, aviation authorities, airlines, and communities worldwide. He's helped author, test, and validate many of the noise reduction strategies currently employed by airports and airlines around the globe. He was part of the innovative team behind early efforts to explore the benefits of continuous descent arrivals with UPS at Louisville in 2002 and 2004, working with the FAA Center of Excellence for Air Traffic Systems and MIT to develop and test new CDA procedures utilizing the Boeing 767-300 ERF that reduce peak noise levels by 4 to 6 decibels over noise-sensitive locations. As the leader of Boeing's Community Noise Engineering Group, he has helped reduce noise at John Wayne Airport. He and his team developed the Transient Community Noise Calculator, which was written specifically to standardize noise qualifications at SNA. The program incorporates engine thrust directivities and aircraft performance characteristics to generate DBA flyover levels at specific points along the flight track. The DBA levels are used to calculate the single event noise exposure level utilized by SNA to establish compliance with noise abatement limits. In addition, he managed the noise certification flight test program for the 787. He was responsible for demonstrating compliance with all aspects of aircraft noise certification defined in 14 CFR Part 36 and ICAO Annex 16, Volume 1. His team captured, analyzed, and validated the noise levels to ensure the 787's compliance with Stage 4 noise certification standards. He also developed and led a NASA Ames research project that studied ways to optimize aircraft configuration and flight profiles to achieve specific reductions in fuel burn, noise, and emissions in relation to both NADP Type 1 and 2 departure procedures. These simulator runs demonstrated significant potential environmental and economic advantages to airline operators, communities, and local airports, and led to the filing of 2 separate U.S. patents for innovative technology that helps reduce noise. But among those accomplishments, I believe his biggest contribution is his willingness to work with airports pro bono to provide technical assistance with specific noise projects. Throughout his career, he was a strong advocate for airports and the community and provided support that helped airports like PDX make informed decisions independent of potential bias of the FAA and airline operators in relation to next-gen procedure development. No person in my professional career better exemplifies the characteristics of the Walt Gillfillan Award, and he dedicated his professional career to ensuring a sustainable future for aviation and quieter skies for communities living around airports. He also served as my personal mentor, realizing and fostering my potential as a young aviation noise professional. It was my distinct pleasure to work alongside him for 10 years and today to call him my best friend. It is my honor and distinct pleasure to present the 2023 Walt Gillfillan Award to Mr. Daniel McGregor.
Thank you. Had to put some anti-skid on it. I'm touched. Thank you. You know, I had a long talk, prepared, and I don't know if I could get through it. This is a once in a lifetime recognition, and I am so thankful. I got to stop there. Thank you all very much. We got one more for you. And I'd like to ask Justin Cook to come forward. Johnny on the spot. Okay, way to go, Justin. And he will make a few comments about his nominee.
Dean, would you like to come up as well? Say a few words too. We're going to tag team this one. I think Sandra is going to. So I'm honored to be up here on stage to present this award that recognizes the achievements and contributions of Mr. Steve Alverson as a pioneer and nationally recognized aviation noise expert. Steve became the first airport noise officer in the country at Stapleton International Airport, where he remained for 5 years. He then went to open and manage a West Coast office for HMMH, where he remained for 14 years. And ultimately, he joined ESA as a regional director, managing trustee, and became its national airports practice leader. And he worked for ESA for 16 plus years. Over his 40-year career, Steve made tremendous personal sacrifices in order to assist airports and their communities in managing and addressing complex and challenging aviation noise issues. He was a project director, a manager, business group leader, roundtable facilitator, community educator, and expert witness. Simply put, Steve was a first-class consultant. Steve worked extensively to improve communications and outreach among all stakeholders, applying his cool and calm demeanor to facilitate and provide technical expertise in a manner that was clearly understandable by all. He was a leader and a mentor who strived to guide others, desired to continuously learn, had a willingness to speak truth to power, and a strong determination to succeed. Steve, you may never know the extent of the impact you've had on your colleagues and industry. You've left a strong legacy behind that will be valued by all of us. We are grateful for your efforts and contributions to our field. Enjoy your retirement, your time with your beautiful family, and your world travels. You've more than earned it. So, thank you, Steve. And now I'm going to have Gene Reindell from HMH say a few words, and then Mike Arnold's also on the line to say a few words too.
Thank you, Justin. I'm really up here just to say about 27 years ago, Steve hired me at HMH. So blame him for what I have become. But I really learned a lot from Steve. He really brought me into this business. I had a technical background. I had worked with Dan McGregor at Boeing for a few years before coming to HMMH. And then Steve hired me from Boeing to fill a position in the Sacramento office. And then Steve left a few years later, and I had really big shoes to fill. And because of everything that he taught me along those first few years has really paid dividends. And even though we became competitors, I still see Steve as one of the best friends in this business. That is one of the things I love about this business, is that even though we're competitors, we can still be friends because we're all in this together to solve the problems of aircraft noise and annoyance. So thank you for everything, Steve, and you certainly well deserve this award.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Arnold. Hopefully you can hear me. I just appreciate the opportunity to say a few words for Steve tonight. You know, Steve has always worked to represent the highest possible standard in the noise consulting industry. As a former, and I believe the first noise officer for Denver, and a consultant and expert witness for much of his career, he's worked on many of the most challenging noise issues and navigated many of the most complex projects. And I had the joy of working side by side on many of those with Steve. Airports like LAX, San Francisco, Portland, SeaTac, LaGuardia, JFK, Denver, you name it, pretty much Steve has has touched it in some way. And he's taught so many in the industry today as well, the basics of aircraft noise, the noise regulatory environment, and really was an active participant in this conference and helped many of you hopefully in the room today. As Justin alluded, he's a true calming force in the room when the tension's high. He has the ability to secure the trust of stakeholders and the unique ability to navigate the conflicting needs of airports, communities, aircraft operators, and the FAA, and work towards real solutions, really trying to push the envelope and advance the relationship between airports and their communities. I just want to say Steve is a trusted colleague, friend, and mentor, and I can think of no one more deserving of this award. With that, Steve, from all your friends and colleagues here at ESA, congratulations.
You ready for me to speak?
Yeah, yes, please.
Well, with all those wonderful things that Justin, Gene, and Mike said about me, I'm wondering why I retired. Perhaps I should have kept working, but I truly am honored and humbled by being selected to receive the 2023 Walter E. Gillfillan Award from the UC Davis Aviation Noise and Emissions Symposium Award Selection Committee. Equally humbling and unknown to me was the list of names of this year's nominees. And of course, my fellow awardee this year, Dan McGregor, he is a true icon in the industry. Walt and I worked together on many of these airport noise symposiums over literally a few decades, almost since the inception of the first one in 1985. Walt and I also interacted as colleagues in the industry, and I followed in his footsteps as the coordinator and facilitator of the San Francisco and LAX roundtables. Walt always set a fantastic example of how to work together, ensuring that all the players at the table, the airlines, the FAA, the community, the airports, how to listen carefully to differing viewpoints and to identify potential solutions to aircraft noise. Therefore, it's truly an honor to receive this award, who is named for Walt, who received the very first honor and to recognize his career. It's also a tremendous honor to be included with several of the aviation giants who received this award previously. Among them, including but not limited to Andy Harris, Vince Mestre, Sandy Fidel, and of course Dan today. They're just amazing people in the aircraft noise industry. When I began my career, they were the aviation experts that I looked up to and tried to emulate. Without them, I just couldn't do what I've done. However, I wouldn't be here today without the support of countless others. As Mike, Gene, and Justin know, when you work in the consulting industry, there are many people behind the scenes who, as we say, are turning the crank, running the noise models, preparing the graphics, putting together PowerPoint slides, word processors, technical analysts that help us all look really, really good in front of the public. I also had some fantastic supervisors and mentors throughout my career, including Dan Wormhout at ESA, Andy Harris at HMH, Nick Miller also at HMH, Ron Alfelt at P&D, and Dick Veazey at Denver Stapleton Airport, where I, as was mentioned by Mike, the first airport noise officer, and which is actually where I am today in Denver, visiting my family and granddaughter here, which is why I couldn't be with you in person. It would have been fun to have received the award and then celebrate afterwards. I also want to recognize and thank those colleagues with whom I enjoyed working every day, including Gene Reindell, Mike Arnold, Autumn Ward, Susumu Shirayama, Chris Jones, Evan Wasserman, and Justin Cook, and many others that I could list on and on, as well as my many, many airport clients across the United States. They made doing the work that I did fun every day and really had some phenomenal clients out there. Finally, I'm profoundly grateful to my family, my mom and dad, who were great examples of caring, compassionate, and empathetic people. 1 minute. To my children, Robert, Ryan, and Taryn, who are caring, thoughtful, contributing members of society, despite or because of the fact that I was traveling most of their developing lives. And I was away from home helping others in other communities throughout the United States. But last but not least, Patty, who's just on the other side of the table here, who supported me throughout my career by providing just the right advice, guidance, and counseling at just the right time. Thank you again for this award. I truly appreciate it.
Thanks for what you did for SFO Roundtable and for me personally. It's been a pleasure.
And I loved working with you, Dave. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much. Just to end with a few closing thank yous. Thanks to the nominators for taking the time and effort to submit their nominations. Thanks to the nomination review and selection committee members for their time and thoughtful effort to select the award recipients. Thanks to all of you, the symposium attendees, for your interest, advocacy, and ongoing career efforts to address aviation noise and emission issues. That wraps up our ceremony. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave. Great presentation. And while we stay on the awards theme, if there was the world's best meeting planner award, the two people in this room, two people who would get it are in this room, Sandra and Olivia. We want to thank you and recognize you on behalf of the planning committee. Many of you may know that 7 years ago, Sandra jumped into this and she totally transformed this event. She listened, she put together the most effective, the most well-balanced planning committee and leveraged us to create what you see today. She helped us survive during the pandemic by pivoting and creating all these virtual aspects that we continue to carry through this day and now have this hybrid opportunity to have people join us from all around the world. It's really become an amazing conference. So let's thank them and give them a round of applause before we close the day.